Please be seated. Friends, we have come a long way since we started our Lenten journey back on Ash Wednesday. Palm Sunday marks the tradition in a transition in our Christian story, the end of Lent and the beginning of Holy Week. Easter, celebration of Jesus' resurrection, is coming, but we still have another week to go. And it's a long week, full of sadness and profound grief, but it's also a necessary week. As Christians, we know that Christ's victory over the grave would not be nearly as sweet if it were not for these tragic events. If we skip from Palm Sunday right over to Easter, the resurrection wouldn't seem quite as miraculous. We can't have a religion with only tales of triumph and happiness, for that would be no religion at all. It certainly wouldn't be a Christian religion. Maundy Thursday, Good Friday, and Holy Saturday are a dark valley of betrayal, deceit, and bitterness for Jesus. As Christians, we are compelled to retell these stories, and so Holy Week begins. This morning, our children's choir waved us on into Palm Sunday and reminded us of the story of Jesus' triumphal march into Jerusalem. Men and women and youth and children came from miles around to get a glimpse of Jesus on the day that he and the disciples arrived in the city for the festival of Passover. Imagine the joy in the hearts of the Jewish people. Jesus Christ, the King of the Jews, is coming into Jerusalem. In Jesus' time, during the Passover festival, the population of Jerusalem swelled from 30,000 to 150,000. I imagine it would be like Quincy hosting the Olympics. It would be a very big deal. Most of us here know the characters in the Palm Sunday story: Jesus and his colt, the disciples hurrying behind him, Zacchaeus, the tax collector, who finds himself up a tree, the colt that was borrowed because the Lord had need of it, the followers who waved palm branches, the children who ran in the streets. But I want to tell you about another thing that happened on the first Palm Sunday, a parallel story of triumphant entry. New Testament scholars Marcus Borg and Dominic Crossan don't believe that the Jesus parade was the only parade going on that day in Jerusalem. As Jesus came from the north and headed toward the temple, from the west came Pontius Pilate, the prefect, or the governor, with a massive army in tow. Now, Pilate wasn't a Jew, so it may seem strange that he would come to Jerusalem for this big Jewish festival. This year, Pilate heard that a strange character named Jesus was to be in the city, followed by hundreds of people for this Passover. Most of the time, Pilate, who's a bureaucrat, worked from his home by the sea, but with a big Passover event happening in the temple in Jerusalem, Pilate, who was charged with keeping the peace, moved his operation eastward. He wanted to be there with his army to make sure that there were no riots, that no one would challenge or threaten the Roman authority in his province. Pilate had most certainly heard that Jesus was going to be there. And to Pilate, Jesus must have been a very puzzling character. Who was this guy who claimed to be the King of the Jews? Jesus certainly didn't look or sound like any other kind of king. Pilate certainly must have wondered, what is this guy about? This guy who went around challenging the authorities, the Pharisees. What was he up to? This guy who claimed to heal the sick and had the audacity to do so on the Sabbath. Who did he think he was anyway, claiming to be the Son of God? Was he a serious threat or just another crackpot selling his own brand of religion to the public? Should Pilate be worried? Who knew? In other words, Pontius Pilate had a problem riding on a pony. If Pilate's fears and suspicions about Jesus seem over the top, it's important to remember that the Jesus that we know is not the Jesus that Pilate knew. We've had thousands of years to study and hear about and understand our Jesus. We already know about his miracles, his teaching, his healing, and we even know how this Easter story turns out. We have the entire New Testament where we can read all about him. Pilate, however, only knew that this Jesus was an outsider, a Jew, not a Roman, a figure whose following was growing,